I'm here with Roger Avary, the director and writer, the adapter of the Rules of Attraction movie. And yeah, how are you doing?
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. It's super exciting to talk about the film after, so many years, but, as well to talk about the book especially. And
Yeah,
what do you think
yeah,
the
the book
book
club is
was?
kind of got started because we wanted to kind of talk more about what Bret has written rather than just his podcast, because we're also listening to this new kind of audio book he's releasing called The Shards, episode by episode right now. And so we thought maybe it's a good idea to kind of go back and deep dive into all of his work and see if we can see any kind of emerging patterns or anything like that to really enjoy the material. And of course, we're on the second book. This is the second live stream, and we're at the Rules of Attraction. And I
Go
guess,
deep,
yeah,
go deep.
I get the first question is,
That's
like,
extra hard.
how did you get in? What was the thing that got you to start writing? Why did you get into writing?
Necessity. I mean, I wanted to be a filmmaker and, to make movies. And if you want to build a house, it's good to be able to read and make blueprints.
Yeah,
And as somebody who has always been fascinated with architecture, I'm specifically fascinated with craftsman style construction, which is sort of this theory of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a German term that means a complete artwork, where it's uh, it's it's integrated. And so so for me, it was natural and necessary and cheaper and easier than finding somebody else to do it for me, to just do it myself. Because to me, I have a very specific idea of what I want to make and what I want to say, which isn't necessarily normal to everybody. What I want to say, and so I have to be really specific when I make my blueprint. When I make my design of what I'm going to do, and that's always the case with me, except for when I'm writing for hire. But it's usually always the case that I'm planning on making it, and I have ideas of who I want to cast. But it was never more true than with when I adapted, Bret's novel, The Rules of Attraction.
yeah, it's already kind of a different work from his first book, Less Than Zero, and he starts to use a lot more kind of devices, jumping perspectives. How did you adapt or attempt to adapt, or how did you go
Well,
about starting adapting a
I
novel?
had been a huge fan of Less Than Zero. It was a very exciting novel for my generation, Generation X at that time. And however it's judged now, I don't know, but I can tell you, in that moment, it was like one of us was doing reportage on what he was seeing and witnessing. And I read that, when I was in the middle of living a very similar kind of experience to Bret. We have our similarities. We're the same age. We, are both from the West Coast. We both went to small liberal arts colleges. We have our differences as well, but there's enough that's similar about us that when Bret speaks, I feel like I feel like it's my own voice. And so it was an extremely, it was an effortless adaptation because what had happened was, I was in college at the time, and when his second book came out, and so I was reading the book as I was living it. And so I'd be like, reading it, and I'd turn a page, and I'd look up, and I would see what was happening around me. And so the book always kind of stayed with me. It was like like a companion piece. And even weird details, like when I had traveled through Europe, I did this kind of European trip that I guess a lot of young people in my generation and before and after did. And where you take a rucksack and you just travel across Europe. And I kept a diary. And when I read Bret's book, I was like, God, it was like I was reading my own diary when he had his European trip that he outlined. I mean, word for word, like, he goes to Greece, who he meets, like the people he's having relationships and affairs with. I was like, oh my God, it's like I'm having the exact same life experiences. And so I really understood it really well. Okay, so then cut 2 years later, you know, I'm in the film industry. It's after Pulp Fiction, after the Oscars, after, you know, I had just, let me see, I think this was right around the time I had just left, I think I'd left Sandman. I was developing Sandman at Warner Brothers. And I was looking for the what next thing to do and developing a whole bunch of material on my own. Like I was developing Beowulf with Neil, but then I also developed out, you know, Rules of Attraction. And what happened was I woke up in the middle of the night. I literally like sat up in the middle of the night, and I had this complete, like, not just a vision, but like a need, like a calling that called to me, where I saw it, the whole movie like crystallized in my head. And I realized that, you know, in adapting material, whenever you adapt material, because by this point in the industry, I'd adapted a whole bunch of things. And, you know, like Sandman, for example. And at this point, like I realized that when you adapt when you adapt a work, you're transforming it in some ways, and you're applying yourself. And what you do is you try to find truth in whatever material you're writing. And then you try to support that truth with your own belief. And usually those truths, you know, when they come from your own life, they're very easy to support and to stand behind. And so I, you know, woke up in the middle of the night. I had this vision. I literally got up right then and there and went to my office and sat down and started writing. And I wrote it. And I wrote the adaptation that I had in my head that was really a way for me to, after that much time, to kind of reflect on my own college experiences. And it was a way for me to exercise those demons and get out, you know, get out all of the those cynical observations and put them on paper. And when I was done, I promptly just took it and put it away, because I didn't own the rights. And which is, by the way, a really like a big time waste of a thing to do, to go out and adapt material you don't own the rights to. But then Greg Shapiro, the producer, he had been trying to get another script that I wrote that I haven't let people read yet. It's about the Hotel Lutetia in Paris, and it's about the things that happened in the Hotel Lutetia before and just after the war and the World War II. And I just don't feel like I'm ready, not just to make that movie, but for anybody to even read it, because it was intense material for me to write. And so Greg was hounding me. He's like, he wanted to read it. He wanted to read it. He's like, that's the movie. That's the movie. I know you have to make that movie. You have to make that movie. And I said, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And so he was breaking me down. And so I finally just grabbed, and I have a couple of scripts that I just don't let people read. They're just in that special drawer that I have that is, these are not ready to be read or they're never to be read even. And so I took it out and I gave him the Rules of Attraction, thinking, what harm can come of it? And he read it and he was like, wow, why are you not making this? Yeah. And I explained that I don't control the rights. I explained to him exactly what I explained to you, that I only wrote it because I had the need to write it. Mm-hmm. And then he said, well, you're crazy, because you've like written in great detail, like how to make the movie, even technically, like with the using motion control cameras and what equipment is needed, things that I would never normally do when I work on a script. You never normally talk about, you know, the cinematic language within the script. You generally leave that up to the filmmaker, to the director to do. I was describing, you know, technical stuff that I needed and how it was going to fold together and what was going to happen. And because I was trying to explain this sort of code, you know, this code that I was working on, basically. Mm-hmm. And so Greg went out and he did a rights check and found out the rights were available. This came just on the heels of American Psycho, and Lionsgate Films, met with them. And I had a friend at Lionsgate, Mike Pasternak. He was from the original Cinepix group, Canadians who eventually became Lionsgate. And Mike saw the material and he was like, oh my God, this is like a sequel to American Psycho. We want to make this, but Roger, do you think you could change the name to the American Psycho 2, The Rules of Attraction? And I said, no, I can't do that. that I can't do. And he said, well, we want to make it anyways. And I have to say, it was a kind of very unlikely experience, because it's very rare that people just leave you alone. It's been very rare to me. This was maybe one of 2 times in my life that people have just left me alone, and to do whatever I do. Our budget was so low, and we weren't really a problem film. We were staying under the radar, and we just made it for a small amount of money and for the fun of doing it. And everybody kind of, we made it in LA, and because of that, everybody who wasn't working was able to just jump on and do it for fun. We really made the movie and I tried to create an experience that was like the book while making the movie for the actors to fall into the.
You have a lot of stars in one movie. and like you said, when you're adapting something like that, and the cinematic notes you had for yourself in the script, that's one thing that really is striking about the movie, is kind of the ambition in the visual language. What did you try and mimic or develop? Why did you use these techniques?
Well, Bret as a writer, I mean, the book especially, but Bret as a writer is super cinematic. I mean, and even when you have dinner with him, or when you talk to him, we had dinner at some sushi restaurant in the Valley, and we're talking and we're having a good time, and we're talking, and suddenly he realizes, oh my God, we've closed down the restaurant. No one else is in the restaurant. It's just us and like a sushi chef. And Bret started to physically panic, and he started getting really anxious. And I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, I'm just afraid, we're the last ones here. They're going to lock the doors. They're going to take us into the back. They're going to cut us up. I know it's going to happen. The camera moves in. And I was like, the camera moves in? It's like, and he's always thinking like this. And that's because he lives in a kind of, it's an exaggeration, but a kind of Victor, Ward and A. Johnson life, where there is a camera. There is a kind of unseen, what's that character in Super Mario 64? Is it Laika? No, I can't remember. Anyhow, it's there's always a camera around Bret. And in his writing, it's especially true. And so he's doing all these magnificent kind of literary devices to create this tapestry, this kind of, it's maybe less of a tapestry because it's not a cohesive image. It's more of a patchwork quilt. Mm-hmm. That when you step back far enough, you start seeing a greater pattern in the design of the patchwork. And it does something that I have a great affinity for, which is unreliable narrators. Almost everything that I've done is in some way about an unreliable narrator, whether it's in Killing Zoe, when you have somebody upstairs and someone downstairs in the bank, and a miscommunication of what's going on between the two, or Beowulf telling his story of what happened when it didn't really happen that way. Or almost everything seems to be, for me, about this concept of perception and reality, which is manipulated by people, by other people.
Right.
Nietzsche would call them. And so, I have an affinity for this. And so it was sort of like, you look at this material, this incredible wealth of this regurgitation of experience that, that could only have been written on crystal meth in the moment, just dumped onto the page. You look at what's happening in it and how people are perceiving each other. And by the way, I don't mean to make it sound like it's haphazard, because Bret is in many ways also incredibly precise. There's so much going on inside of the Rules of Attraction that you could make 100 movies, 1,000 movies, 10,000 movies out of what's happening in it. Mm-hmm. I for a very brief moment we set up development of the Rules of Attraction as a TV series, at Bravo. And I think they bought it because they wanted, like, oh, rich kids of Instagram, that's what it's going to be. And I don't think they realized that what I wanted to make was The Wicker Man. Because when I read the Rules of Attraction, not only do I see a comedy, not only do I see the Jean Renoir film, Le Règle du Jeu, and Bret's kind of own interpretation of that movie. I see so many different things inside of it. I see, there's an entire discussion inside of the film about, I think it's drama students sacrificing people in the woods.
Yeah.
And which I'm sure has something to do with OWTQ, which is a code that's thrown out there every now in the book. And so when I sat down to develop the series, I thought to myself, what's more interesting is this idea of this cult inside of the school. And so I started developing that. And I think that was probably too dark for Bonnie at NBC's kind of blue sky mandate at that time. And which is unfortunate, because it would have been a really, like a literary, like another literary interpretation. And I chose not to, or we chose not to have Sean, Lauren, or Paul in the TV series at all. They're only referred to. Everything is like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Nice.
Where, everything is happening in the wings of the Rules of Attraction. And so there you see all the things that are going on around them. And so I thought that would be really an interesting.
Yeah, because there was, even just when the movie came out, and when you look at old trailers on YouTube for the movie, they were trying to kind of advertise it as something that it wasn't, because it was a lot bigger than just a college sex comedy.
Yeah, well, listen, I have to say, like, first of all, like, as I go into the conversation about the distribution, that I have never, ever in my life been as supported by a production or by a studio than I was with the Rules of Attraction and by Lionsgate Films. It was an absolutely perfect experience, despite the fact that 9/11 happened in the middle of it and the production was collapsing at all moments. They had nothing to do with that. I had nothing but support from everyone around me to go for it, which is extraordinary, as to be able to to have that. And so when the movie was nearing completion, we started, the executives started seeing it, and they were looking at it and they were like, it's brilliant, but we've never seen anything like this. We don't know how to sell this. Maybe it wasn't that we've never seen anything like it. It was more that we just don't know, like, just imagine, and we had, by the way, someone who I think is maybe the very, very best PR marketing guy there is, which was Tim Palin, who was designing our posters. And he's designed a number of, he did the posters for Nurse 3D and for, he was responsible for a kind of renaissance in poster design at Lionsgate at that time. I have no idea if he's still there at the company, but that guy and his kind of throwing his everything, just like any of the actors in the movie threw themselves into their character, that guy threw himself into it. All the post people at Lionsgate were totally rallying behind me. It was an amazing moment, because no one knew how this was possibly going to be received, and everybody was supportive of it. And then 9/11 happened, and suddenly the narrative in the newspapers and the New York Times and everything was literally, the headline was "Irony is dead," which is not a good thing for a movie like The Rules of Attraction. And so I think there was a struggle, on how do you sell this movie to people? How do you sell this movie that has all this young, hot talent in it, but is kind of like a condemnation of this culture? Mm-hmm. And, is kind of, in some ways there's two kinds of movies. There's escapist films, and then there's the films that when you leave the theater, it's kind of, you're asking questions and you're not sure what you just saw. And you're like, oh my God, should I feel the way I'm feeling? And I feel a little, like I need to go confess or something. It's like, it's two separate kinds of films. Mm-hmm. And this was definitely not I don't know, Dude, Where's My Car? which I like. I like Dude, Where's My Car? That guy, by the way, made Harold and Kumar with the same producer, Greg Shapiro.
Yeah.
And Harold and Kumar is a kind of brilliant, like, it's kind of a brilliant movie. So I think not kind of, it's a brilliant film.
Yeah.
So, but I meant more that this was just not going to be the just goofy fun, like stick your dick into a pie movie.
No.
And although that would have been appropriate in this film, no slag on sticking your dick in pie movies. That's like
there is like, that is one of the things that you see in the movie, is not just the shift of perspective and you have all of the backwards in time stuff, which seems, just rewatching it now, I can't believe this was all in this one movie. But
and that, like, nowadays, if they would just shoot that on digital and just flip it on the Avid and run it out. And I didn't do it like that. I mean, we were shooting this on film. I actually ran the film backwards through the magazines. So, like, what that does is, film is a chemical process, and when you're looking at a frame, and you're watching still images, flashed onto a screen, projected like through a stained glass window, and there's 24 of them every second, and your mind is creating the illusion of motion. And you kind of fall into this magic trick that occurs before you. Part of that is the chemical process of film that you simply cannot achieve when shooting on video, like almost every other movie is made these days. I mean, most movies are shot on video. Mank, Fincher's new film, it's shot on video, and it's made for TV, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's most movies are. In fact, one of the only movies I've seen this year that I can really point at as there's probably a ton of them, but Judd Apatow made a film, The King of Staten Island, shot on film, intended for theatrical release. I think that qualifies as a film. Like, that qualifies as something that is the craft of cinema being put on screen, where you turn on the camera and you have a finite amount of time to capture the moment. Mm-hmm. And it just turns on, and you capture the moment, and you're burning money when the film is going, because it's this chemical process. Something happens to you when you can delete your take like an email. Something happens to you as an artist. Yeah. Something happens to you when you can slam you just use your fingertip to touch a space bar while you're editing. Mm-hmm. It changes your relationship to the medium. And as we're talking about, mediums here, mm-hmm. part of what's important about Rules of Attraction was that it was kind of, it was shot on film. It was shot for performance. We were making a performance movie, and trying to look deep that way into the material. And so anyhow, when you run film through the camera backwards, film, the way it works is the film, unexposed film, is grabbed by a claw, dragged into a spot, registered in place. This is all in the 24th of a second, and a shutter swings by. And on some cameras, the shutter moves vertically, and on some cameras, the shutter moves horizontally. And that will have an effect on you, because that creates a very imperceptible blur that, in fact, you can notice it when an eclair camera tilts, for example. It strobes a little because the shutter is moving in the other way, or maybe it's the Mitchell mechanism, which is what Panavision uses. The shutter will move horizontally, and that way you can do smoother pans. People tend to pan more. Yeah. And so when you run film backwards through the camera, the shutter is wiping it in a special way, and it creates an imperceptible, or a seemingly imperceptible. It's perceptible by your subconscious mind, by beta cycles in your brain, which interpret what you're seeing and and process that information. And it's simply different than video, which, by the way, uses refresh rates instead of the persistence of memory. And so these refresh rates, the pixels are even progressive scan, it's just the pixels are just refreshing. And what this does is it activates alpha cycles in your brain. And so there's a kind of physical interpretation of the media, by a physiological interpretation of the media. And so when adapting Bret's writing into this medium, I specifically thought about, especially in this book, with its themes of detachment and yearning for connection, that all of the characters have, that I was certainly feeling at the time, and perhaps it's a lifelong feeling that that I have and that I need. But it just felt appropriate in this material, especially, to explore the way Bret explored, and to try to look deep into that material, not to necessarily see what Bret was doing, what Bret was about, because the only truth that I could find was the truth in myself, which is why there's subtle changes in the material. And I was very afraid of offending Bret when he finally would see the movie. And lights came up on one screening, and I saw that he was there in a test screening, and I was panicky. And it turned out he, has been very gracious. And loves the movie. So I'm very lucky in that way.
Regularly on the podcast. So it's one of his, he thinks, most successful adaptations.
Part of it is just simply because the two of us have so many. If we were Venn diagrams, we would have so many overlapping areas in our lives that allows me a kind of shorthand with Bret. I've written with Bret and on other projects, and it's the same. There's a very quick shorthand with him. I mean, I personally think he's moving, frequently 10, 20 steps ahead of everyone. And he likes to pretend that he's behind and reserve it so that he can analyze. But so he's probably ahead of me most of the time. But what makes it easier? It makes it easier for me to adapt his work. I've also adapted Glamorama and Lunar Park. I've done an adaptation of Lunar Park as well.
Oh, wow. Well. But the Glamorama one has never been released.
Not yet. I am trying. It has been a tough one. And, the state of the world, now that the world has officially become Glamorama and has become a satire, and that we see the events actually playing out in real life, we see such strong parallels in the real world. One wonders, is it more relevant or less relevant? I mean, I personally think it's more relevant, and I'm just exploring how to do it. And this the current global situation has provided a nice little moment of reflection for myself.
I think you're right, especially just what you were saying with Lesson Zero and Rules of Attraction. This idea of Bret being kind of like a camera is always on him. That is kind of how it is today. You can feel that there's kind of this prediction of the way people are going to be 20 years from the time that book is published. But do you think today, if you were going to make a movie, that this is something that would be easy? Like, would Rules of Attraction be possible to be made today, or would it be harder to make? How do you make a movie with unlikable characters?
Possible. Like, it could be done. There's a the answer is yes. In fact, right now, someone is doing their not their version, because that's not correct, but somebody is breaking ground right now in some other way, and maybe not in cinema, because I'm not certain cinema is as relevant an art form as home video is now. And so it would be different. I think that there's a number of filmmakers out there who I'd be interested in seeing what their version of Rules of Attraction would be. I think that you could make a dozen movies if Lionsgate came to me and said, Roger, we want you to produce 10 Rules of Attraction films, all simultaneously, I would love that. I would totally do it and make 10 completely, different interpretations of the same material. It'd be Yojimbo attraction. So it would be it'd be cool.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to do that, but I would do it. And in a way, that's kind of what I was planning with the series. I mean, in a way, I was planning on bringing in filmmakers and then giving them a great amount of freedom, in cinematic freedom, with how to, interpret the material. I mean, commonly people watch TV again and again for familiarity, and to see a kind of some sort of consistency on in long form. And so it would almost anthologize what is, not necessarily an anthology, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It'd be a kind of it would instantly make them kind of stand alone, even though it was a long form story.
Yeah. So, could it be done today? Yeah. I would love to remake Less Than Zero. That was something, but I have to say, I love Less Than Zero. I know that might not be a popular thing to say, but I think Ed Lachman's cinematography, which was an inspiration for me. It was one of the reasons I hired Robert Brinkman, the DP, is because his color looked like it would slide off of the celluloid.
Yeah.
It had this kind of quality that Ed Lachman, did with his work on Less Than Zero, which I think is one of the most beautiful shot films of that time period. Now, I hated Less Than Zero I was furious about it when I first came. I walked out of the theater. It was like I was in Westwood, and I walked out into the bright daylight, like out of the first show, and I was like, "Fuck!" Like I was pissed. I was with Quentin, and I started walking, and he kind of chased after me, and it was like I was pissed. I mean, he didn't like the movie so much. Years later, I started watching it again and again because one of the things that I was so upset about are the things that I kind of love about it now. I mean, first of all, even then, no one can deny how good Robert Downey Jr. was in that film.
Yeah.
Playing Julian, he gave himself to that role. Mm-hmm. I kind of was super critical of Jamie Gertz but I now think of her performance as kind of an iconic performance. Mm-hmm. It's, when he's like, when she says, I think she says some line like, "But do I look good?" And it's such amazing delivery. I can watch that scene, which I think is shot at this after hours club that was in downtown LA in an abandoned building. We used to go to it all the time, and they shot there. And she delivers this line to Andrew McCarthy, and it's so good. I mean, so much that movie is great until it clearly starts to moralize.
Right.
It starts to, and that's something that Bret would never do unless he's making fun of moralizing. Mm-hmm. Suddenly there, somebody at the studio was like, "Holy fuck, we're making a movie about like a bunch of cocaine addict zombies." What are we going to do? And so they figured out we can't possibly put this movie out with this message. Amazingly, like nobody's gotten my way in the same way. It was just a fortunate time in history. Lionsgate being who they were at the time they did it, coming right off of American Psycho, which, by the way, they were very brave to both make and to release, because I don't know if you remember, that movie was like being picketed in Canada.
Yeah. I
was very upset about it. Copycat killers, and Bret, was probably a little nervous. And so for the studio to basically say, "Go for it." I mean, I have, in many ways, it's weird to say, I probably have Mary Herron to thank, for that, for laying that groundwork.
Nice. Well, and I guess you got, like you said, you have Glamorama, and you've adapted Lunar Park. Like you've made a script.
Yeah, I adapted Lunar Park for some producers a number of years back. Let's see, around 2012, I think, is when it was. I did an adaptation of it, and with the intention of directing it. And I would actually still love, the rights reverted back to Bret. Bret now controls to my knowledge, Bret controls the rights to Lunar Park.
Okay.
And, so who knows? But the truth is, I don't want to be a pig at the table and go, here's some Glamorama. Over here's some Rules of Attraction. Oh, give me some of that Lunar Park too. I want to remake American Psycho. Also, I should probably just chill a little bit, focus on Glamorama and getting that right. And
Yeah.
so,
but because was your last film Lucky Day?
yeah. Well, no, my last film has yet to be released. It's a French language film called La Voix Humaine. It's an adaptation of a Jean Cocteau play.
Okay.
It stars Elsa Zilberstein, French actress.
Okay. So. And do you because you've done these adaptations, like you've got the obviously Rules of Attraction, you've got this Lunar Park one that you've done. Are you still reading as much as you did when you were younger? Are you finding it harder to read now? Because I know a lot of people say just the technology of today makes them worse readers than they were 20 years ago.
Well, I'm only just discovering this, actually, that it is impossible for me to read anything with any kind of stamina for any length of time when it's digital. I just start zoning out. The material doesn't permeate. It's the pixels are floating around and it's immaterial. And then when I pick it up, I don't know where I am, and I don't have a physical book. And I realized, it may be a Luddite statement, to make, but I'm a fetishist for objects. I like to own a book. Yeah. I like to have that book, and I like to wear it out. I like to dog ear it and make a couple of notes in it, put it on my shelf, and then pull it out years later. And, it hasn't changed too much. I can find my notes. I can see where the pages are extra worn, where I've cracked the spine in the middle. I try not to do that, by the way. I'm actually really good with my books, but, in other words, it's a tactile experience for me. Yeah. It's a physical, intimate experience with, something that I grow to love. Hopefully, if it stays in my house, I grow to love it and keep it, and and to cherish it and honor it, in the way that, in a way to honor the author and the excellence of the material itself. I have a number of books around my house like this. I've got books from the 1800s that I collect, that I, for the very same reason. And so, yeah, I have trouble. I have trouble reading online. So I guess, everyone is probably doing a lot more reading because we're always online. Mm-hmm. But as far as substantive reading, reading of a book, I find frequently now it's connected with my work. Yeah. For example, I adapted recently Caleb Carr military history novel called The Devil Soldier. My daughter and I adapted it. The Devil Soldier is, I won't call it dry material, but it is very well-researched material. And it's military history. And so it's primarily battles. And we adapted the screenplay for Antoine Fuqua and to make. It's about the Taiping Revolution in China. And so, when you adapt a material, you have to more than read it. You have to really drop into it. I also just adapted another book that I read called Hotel K by Kathleen Bonilla. And it's a, Catherine Bonilla, I'm sorry. It is it's a TV series, meant to be a TV series about the Hotel Carabocan in Bali, which is a prison there. I had some experience being incarcerated, and so it was, when I choose whatever I do, I try to choose something that I know that I can find some kind of truth to put into it, some kind of perspective, so that I so that even if the material is viewed upon by anybody else who's like, doesn't mean anything to them, it'll mean something to me. Like, I know that what I've done is at least true to what I know, which is the best that I can endeavor to do when working with someone else's material. And having said that, I think it's important to, John Milius, the writer of Apocalypse Now, and I tell this story probably frequently because it's such a fucking good story. John Milius, he's a friend of mine. I've worked with him before and collaborated with him. And so, you get close to somebody, he tells you a lot of stories, and he told me what is one of my favorite stories. And it has become the most important story for me to relay when I'm talking about interpreting material. The story goes like this. One night, late at night, the phone rings and John Milius answers, and it's Stanley Kubrick calling him. And he says, "I'm Stanley Kubrick. I'm a film director. Do you know who I am?" He's like, "Oh, of course I know who you are." It's like, "I'm happy to talk to you," blah, blah, blah. And he says, "I'm calling because I understand that you're the gun expert in Hollywood. You're the military history expert, and you know guns and firearms and weapons." He's like, yes, I know everything. There's blah, blah, blah. He probably wouldn't say he knows everything, but John does. And so Stanley says, "Okay, well, I'd like your help. I want to buy a handgun, firearm, for target shooting specifically. And I want the very best, pistol ever made." And John said, "Well, that's a 1911 Colt 45 Special. And that is a very difficult gun to find." And Kubrick said, "Well," and an expensive one. And Kubrick said, "Well, that's the gun I would like you to help me find. Listen, I have one requirement. Can you find me this Colt 45 unused, never fired?" And Milius is like, "I don't know. Let me see what I can do. That's going to be tough." And he looks around, and in Texas, he finds a gun collector who has this gun, and he sells it. He's willing to sell it. And he calls up Kubrick and says, "Not only did I find the gun, not only has it never been fired, it's never been taken out of its box. It is a perfectly virgin, firearm. It is new. It's expensive." Kubrick doesn't care. Money goes from England to Texas, and the gun goes from Texas to England. And a couple of months later, Milius finds himself back on the phone with Kubrick, and he asks him, "How do you like the handgun?" And Kubrick says, "Oh, I love it. I love it. I took off the mother of pearl handles and I replaced it with mahogany. I replaced all the screws and re-anodized the whole thing. I shaved 1/4 millimeter off of the eye line and realigned the bead. I rebored the barrel. I switched out the trigger. I did this, I did that." And Milius is like, "Oh, what have you done? You've ruined it." And Kubrick says, "No, I made it better." And that is how you have to approach adapting material. You have to be willing to take this thing that is perfect, this thing that is just virgin, and you have to be willing to completely disassemble it and to recreate it into something new for your purposes. Fortunately, you're not destroying a 1911 45 Special, for whatever reasons you have, but because the book will always exist. The Rules of Attraction in its pure form as a novel, will exist as a companion to my movie and to whatever movie is ever made about the Rules of Attraction in many years to come. And so, so my perspective is, when approaching material, like you can be too slavish to material. You can be too precious with it. I think this is like one of the problems with those Harry Potter movies. They're so afraid of like offending someone. "Oh, the table was square in the book, not round." It's like, how could it be a square table? How could it's fucking Hollywood? It's like, look, I mean, it's a petty thing to think about, but you have to be willing to take it apart and to approach it. And at the same time, you have to be true to it, to its ethic. And so, I knew that I'm creating something new. I'm creating a movie out of a book that is almost amorphous, a book that is, you could do all these different things with, and you could make anything out of. And so this was an opportunity to, to make an interpretation that was very, very close to me. But during that entire endeavor, I just tried to always remain true to Bret's ethic, to remain true to that, to his tone, his feeling, the longing that he felt, that I feel, the detachment that he felt, that I feel. Those things that I feel in the material are more important than the element, the basic structure of what is called a plot normally in movies. And because I have this really strong philosophy and belief, I mean, it's not even me, it's just my perspective on writing is that there is plot and there is story. And people will go see a movie for plot once, twice, if it's really good, but they'll go see a movie for story again and again and again and again. Towering Inferno, that's a movie that is plot based. You have a building that's actually that's a movie that's story based. It's a building on fire and O.J. Simpson is falling from it on fire. Okay, that is story. Yeah. Richard Chamberlain being cheap and getting cheap wiring and to do his building, and then that's what causes the short, and that's plot. No one remembers that. No one cares about that. What people think about is the feeling, the story. And what story is Steve McQueen Steve McQueen, I think, looking up at the building and saying, you guys just keep building them higher and higher and keep expecting us to, put out the fires, or whatever it is, whatever line he says, that's story. And so in staying true to Bret, I tried to stay true to the story. The plot, secondary. A story-driven movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey. What's the plot of that film? We found something, we're going to go get it. We're going to go look at it. It's
yeah, that's great.
Story-based.
That's really good. I think we're good right here. We're at about an hour.
Great. Well, super.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you very much.
No, I thank you. It was really fun. It's really fun to talk about it. This is one of my favorite, obviously it's one of my favorite books. I have the first edition, and I was like, which bookshelf is it in? And I started looking right before the call, and I wish I had my first edition with me.
Oh yeah, I'm going through it right now. So I got
yeah, there it is.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing this for us.
I have a question. Are you able to see my screen? Let's see, share screen. I want to show you something.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, hold on one second. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Host disabled participant.
I'll fix it.
Can you fix that?
Yeah, I can fix one. Sharing options. Who can share? Okay. There we go. Does that work now?
Hold on one sec. Okay. Can you see this now?
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, so what you're looking at, you sent me a piece of text from the book to read.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want to read that text out loud because I'm not an actor. And, but Ian Somerhalder would be amazing reading that text. But I wanted to point out something in that text that shows how deep Bret is thinking when he does stuff. In the text, Paul has gone from Camden to Boston, right? And so looking at the monitor right now, you'll see that what I've done is I've created a route based on the bus trip that he takes. Now, Bret is making a point here because there is no way that this is the bus that he takes. He doesn't, he stops in Lawrence and then Bellows, then Newport, Walcott, Winchester, and then ultimately at Camden, which I assume is Bennington.
Yeah.
And so looking at it, you realize he has done the most circuitous snake-like path, through, all these states, to get back to school. What is Bret saying? This is a coded joke. There's so many of these inside of the material. The material is so dense with these little inside gags like this. Like Paul, on his gay holiday trip to see his mom, he takes the most non-straight route that one can imagine. It is like a giant, he goes everywhere. He's traveling through, this is a 10 and a half hour trip that Bret is describing as, this kind of overnight thing on the way back to Bennington. So maybe that was the case. Maybe it really was, maybe he really did take this trip. But looking at the geography, which I hadn't done when I made the movie, was actually kind of interesting to me because I realized, they mentioned Keene in the movie and in the book. Like in the hospital, they're like, we've got to take him to the hospital, and so in Keene, that's all the way in Keene or whatever. And looking at it, you can see Keene is up here, right near Bellows, which, a small drive from what must be Camden, which is obviously Bennington. I mean, it's Bennington.
Right.
Anyhow, I just thought, I looked at that and I was like,
oh, this is great. This is perfect. Thank you.
I looked at that and I just thought it was amazing.
Yeah, that's really, There's so going through each book, this has been like, I like it because I wanted to do something this year where I just really went into material like this because I write myself, and I just wanted to have something that I did regularly that kind of is a discipline to really look into stuff as you're working on it. And this is great. Thank you.
I mean, it's interesting because, Paul's, in many ways, he's my favorite character because he's the one who feels the deepest and the most, I feel. It's so easy to want to follow Sean, as a main character because of how incredibly damaged and strong a character he is. Paul is it's a much more difficult balance to find. But anyhow, this I thought was a good example of, how Bret writes, because everything Bret writes is a kind of encoded message. Everything is encoded. Yeah. I'm still trying to find out what OWTQ is, and if anybody, who watches the book club thing has I'd be really interested, because I created an entire mythology, my daughter and I did, because we were working on the series, which never came to pass, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that would have been great.
Anyhow, that's so thank you again. This was wonderful fun. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thanks for doing this. This has been great, and you've been wonderful.
Take care.
I'll see you later.
Have a great day.
You too.